Hello and welcome. I'm Odin and this is my channel. Today I wanted to talk to you all about Wrath of the Lich King Hunter macros. If you don't know what those are, let me tell you. Macros are essentially like you creating your own spells. You can combine two spells to take up one action bar slot. You can even attach potion uses to those spells. You can attach modifier keys so that at the click of a shift button, you can turn one spell on your action bar into another. You can even tie in large cooldowns, like rapid fire, for example, into key spells within your rotation if that is something that you really want to do. Overall, there's a ton you can do with macros, and it might seem too complex or like it will take too much time to set up, but don't worry, it's not. Taking the time now to set up your macros is going to save you more time going forward in the future, as well as increase your skill level as a hunter and your DPS output. Alright, let's start talking about macros. First, let's start by talking about 434. This is a macro that you've probably heard other hunters talk about if you're in the hunter Discord or you play with other hunters in your guild. Essentially, this is a survival specific macro, as it is for explosive shot. What this does is that it sets up a cast sequence so that if you proc your lock and load talent, you'll cast a explosive shot rank 4, an explosive shot rank 3, and then an explosive shot rank 4. This allows you to maximize your DPS output even more than you were before. You can see how the structure of this macro is set up. It starts with us having show tooltip explosive shot so that the little picture shows us an explosive shot. Then we have cancel aura deterrence. In case we had just popped our defensive ability that locks us out from using any other spells, this will go ahead and cancel that aura so that we can do damage right away. Then we have the bulk of our macro, our cast sequence for the 434. How this is set up is that if your lock and load procs and you stay on highlighted on that single target, then you can go ahead and spam this ability and use up your 3 charges, and it'll use your explosive shot rank 4, then rank 3, then rank 4 to maximize your DPS. Alternatively, with this same macro, if you wanted to spread rank 4 among multiple targets, you could hit it once, then tab target to another target, hit it again, tab target to another target, and hit it again, and all of those targets will have a rank 4 explosive shot on them. The part of this macro that allows that to happen is the reset equals 2. That part allows it so that when you target a new target, it resets the cast sequence. After that, we have our cast auto shot. This allows us to make sure that we have uptime on our auto shot at all times, since that's a large percentage of our damage. And then, so we don't have to pay attention to kill shot, and we just will know that whenever it's up, as long as we're doing damage, then our pet is going to have kill shot active. We put cast kill command into all of our spells. Next, I'm going to talk about other spells that are built similarly to explosive shot so that you can see how the one macro can build most of the structure for your other macros. Let's talk about Black Arrow next. Here is our Black Arrow macro. You can see how we start off with show tooltip Black Arrow, just like we had with explosive shot. This allows the image for this spell to show as Black Arrow. Then we have cancel aura deterrence so that we can cancel our defensive ability. Then we have our cast Black Arrow. Very simple for this because this is just to cast our Black Arrow. Then we have the line cast auto shot to make sure that we have our 100% uptime on our auto shot. And then we have our cast kill command. Next, we have our kill shot macro. This is built the same. The only difference with our kill shot macro is the cast kill shot. Next, we have our multi-shot. This is built the same as the other spells. The only difference is our cast multi-shot. And then we also have our Serpent Sting, which is set up the same way as the other ones. The only difference here is that we have cast Serpent Sting. If you happen to be playing any other specializations than Survival, you can take the basic structure that we just outlined in all the other spells, and you can bring that over to other spells that you actually use in your rotation. For instance, if you use Arcane Shot, for example, you could take the structure from Kill Shot, Serpent Sting, the multi-shot, and you can make your own macros for Arcane Shot, for example. The only difference for Arcane Shot would be we would change our show tooltip space Arcane Shot, and then down into the middle of the macro we would do /cast space Arcane Shot. And that would be our macro to cast Arcane Shot. We can also do that with like Aim Shot, for example, if you're a marksman. The build would be pretty much the same for any of those damage abilities that you don't want to put any other modifiers on. Now let's talk about a macro that's going to be set up a little bit differently. That is within your normal rotations. For example, Steady Shot. Steady Shot, as you can see, is a little bit different, but for the most part, it's the same. We have Show Tooltip Steady Shot like the other spells. Then we're going to have Cast Steady Shot. Then we're going to have Cast Auto Shot. Then Cast Kill Command. And then we're going to have Use Frosted Android Handguards. For me, this spell might be a little bit different than some of you hunters. Because I have my used gloves at the bottom of this macro due to me being an engineer and having the enchant hyperspeed accelerators, which increases my haste. The reason why I have it on Steady Shot is because that increased haste is going to allow me to cast Steady Shot faster. So I put it into spells that will be directly affected by those gloves being activated. And since the gloves can be activated so many times within one fight, it's so much easier to just have it macroed into the spells that are going to be affected by that ability rather than trying to click it every time that it comes off of cooldown, because that'll just take even more time out of your damage rotation. Another spell that I'll put my gloves on for that hyper speed acceleration is Volley. On the screen, you can see what my volley is set up like. Now, you don't have to set it up exactly like this. You can set it up a different way and still have your gloves macroed onto it. So let me explain. First, we start off with Show Tooltip Volley. Just like the other spells, this allows us to show the picture as our volley ability. Next, we have /cast. Then we have it in a box at cursor, and then space volley. What the at cursor does is allow us to have our mouse anywhere on the screen that we want, and then hit our keybind for this volley ability, and it'll cast on anywhere that I have my mouse. This is just really good for abilities like flare and volley, because otherwise without that at cursor, it's a ability that requires 2 steps to it. You'll have to hit the keybind, and then you have to designate where you want the spell, and then click again. That is just extra time that's eating up your damage rotation. Whereas with the macro setup like this, it is just one button. Now, sometimes this macro can mess up with the engineering gloves attached to it, and sometimes it'll make you cast a volley, and then it'll interrupt that volley, cast your gloves, and then you can cast another volley. Now, if you have any recommendations on how I can switch this macro to improve that and stop that from happening, please let me know in the comments below. But even with that happening, I still think this macro is worth it, because sure, it's going to mess up that first volley, which will eat up that 0.5 seconds. So it'll make it essentially the same as not having that macro, but any further use of the volley after that is going to be instant, so you're going to gain that time afterward. If you wanted to set up volley a different way, all you would have to do is change the at cursor. you can either delete it out of the macro to have it cast like a normal volley, but still have the gloves attached to it. Or you could even change the @ cursor to an @ player. And what this would do is that it would cast the volley as the middle point. Speaking of that, I have my flare set up just like that. So on the screen, you can see a simple @ player flare ability. I use this for PvP in case I think there's going to be a rogue around me. I'll go ahead and just click my keybind for this spell, and it'll cast the flare right at my feet. You could also change this macro to be an @ cursor if you want, to have the same ability like the volley does. Next, let's talk about my misdirection macro. This misdirection macro is a lifesaver for me personally, as a lot of times I'll forget who the tank is, or taking that extra time to cast misdirection. Sometimes I would skip it before I had this macro set up because it would take time out of my damage rotation to highlight the player I wanted to cast misdirection on. And this just saves me all that time that was wasted before. So essentially, how this macro is set up is it is show tooltip misdirection like the other spell, so that it shows as a misdirection. And then it says /cast @ focus, help. And then it says help. Then in another box, it's @ pet if it exists. And then misdirection, so that the macro knows to cast misdirection. Now that sounds really confusing, but let me explain what that does. If you have a focus target set, then clicking this ability will cast misdirection on that focus target for you. So you could go ahead and right click your main tank, for example, and set him as a focus target in a heroic dungeon or a raid. And then anytime that you just hit that ability one time, it will allow you to cast misdirection on that tank. What this also does is that if you do not have a focus target set, it'll automatically cast misdirection on your pet. Next, we have a almost all-in-one pet utility macro here. This says /cast modifier revive pet, then @ pet if it's dead, revive pet. If you don't have any pet out, it'll call pet, and then if neither of those are true, then it'll mend pet. So essentially, if your pet is dead, this spell will show as a revive pet. If your pet is not dead and it's not out, it'll call your pet. And if your pet is out, then it'll mend pet. So with hunters, we have a ton of spells. And if you want to reduce the amount of keys you have on your action bars, this is a great way to do it, because it's pretty much taking 3 spells and making it 1 key. Speaking of making 3 spells 1 key, if you don't use traps very often, but you still want those traps on your action bars, then you could set up a keybind like this. This is one that I've made myself. So how this is set up is that it says show tooltip, modifier alt, snake trap, explosive trap. Then it says stop casting, stop attack, /cast, modifier alt, snake trap, explosive trap. If I have this on my bar, then it will show as an explosive trap. But if I hit alt or hold alt down, that same key will show as a snake trap. Now you can set this up even farther by adding additional modifiers. You can add multiple traps on the same keybind. You could have all your traps on the same keybind and just have a different modifier key for it. So you could have it naturally show as explosive trap, and then you could have a modifier that if you hold down shift, it'll show as your frost trap. And then if you hit modifier control, it'll show as your snake trap. And then if you hit modifier alt, it'll show as, you know, your ice trap or whatever. Or, you know, you could set it up like that so that it reduces the amount of spells you need on your action bar. If you're using those traps all the time, this macro might not be the greatest macro for you. But if you're using these traps every once in a while, this is a great macro to reduce the amount of spells you have on your action bars. Alternatively, you could set this up to not specify what modifier will show the other trap. So if you just delete the alt in this macro, then it will change on every modifier key. And the modifier keys are shift, control, and alt. You could also set up your aspects the same way. Now, you could customize this however you want. You could set it up to have only 2 on the same spell. You could set it up to have 4 on the same spell. How you set the macro up is up to you. But for the purpose of showing different ways to set up macros, I have a different way to do your aspects shown on the screen here. This macro says show tooltip, and we're not going to specify what the tooltip is. And then we have a cast sequence, exclamation point aspect of the pack, and then comma exclamation point aspect of the cheetah. What this macro is going to do is that if we hit this key once, we're going to go ahead and cast aspect of the pack. And if we hit the same key again, it's going to cast aspect of the cheetah. And if we hit it again, it'll cast aspect of the pack. Now you could set it up to have a full-on cast sequence of all your aspects. I don't recommend to do it like that because if, for example, you're currently on Dragonhawk and you want to cast aspect of the Viper, but you have that set up at the end of your cast sequence, you're going to have to click through 5 times to get to your aspect of the Viper. But you could combine similar aspects with each other. For a while, I was rocking Dragonhawk paired with Viper, and aspect of the cheetah with aspect of the pack, and then I just kept aspect of the wild separate. Now you could set your aspects as a cast sequence, or you could set it up as a modifier spell. I'll leave that up to you guys. There's a ton you can do with macros, and it's really just up to however you want to customize your action bars. Now let's talk about Feign Death and Shadow Meld. If you want to reduce the amount of spells you have on your action bars even more, here's a macro that'll go ahead and combine Feign Death and Shadow Meld on the same button. So how this is set up is it says show tooltip. We're not going to specify what the tooltip is because this is a modifier spell. Then it says / stop casting because we're trying to leave combat here. So we're going to stop casting. Then we have stop attack. Then it says cast modifier Shadow Meld. And then / cast no modifier Feign Death. How this macro works is that if we're not clicking any modifier key like shift, control, or alt, this spell will be Feign Death. But if we want to use Shadow Meld, we just have to hit shift, control, or alt, and then it will show as a Shadow Meld. Now, if you've ever run into any situations where you wanted a certain cooldown for your pet abilities to show on your normal action bars, but you found that you can't get those spells onto your action bars and they only will replace spells on your pet bar, I have the fix for you, and that's through macros. On the screen, you can go ahead and see a simple macro that allows you to put Call of the Wild onto your action bars. This will show you when it's used. You'll be able to click this button to use Call of the Wild, and you'll be able to see the cooldown on it. This same macro works with your other pet abilities. You can use this for Furious Howl if you're using a wolf. You can use this for Rabbit as well if you have that talented. I use this just because I like to pay attention to those cooldowns, and especially because your pet doesn't always use those spells on cooldown. Sometimes those hang up and your pet doesn't use them for 3 to 5 seconds, and that's a lot of downtime when your pet has the ability to use them. Now, if those are on your bar, you can see what the uptime is on that or what the downtime is on it, and you can immediately make a correction to that and fix that right away. Similarly, you can make a macro for your gloves to watch the cooldown on your gloves if you want to make a macro for it. Or if you want to pair multiple on-use gear pieces onto the same button. For example, I like to pair my engineering boot ability with my cloak ability. So here's the macro I have to do that. When I click it, it'll use my speed boots and it'll pop my parachute. This macro is great for PvP especially, and you can combine this macro with, for example, disengage, so that you can both disengage, pop a parachute in case you go ahead and jump off of a cliff or something like that. But you're probably not going to want to pair all of those on the same key, but you could always pair your parachute, for example, with your disengage if you want to pop those two all the time together through the use of a macro. And if you just pay attention to how the other macros were set up, I'm sure that you could figure out how to set that up for yourself. Now, here's a couple macros that are not specific for Hunter. So this section will be for pretty much anybody. First, let's talk about my mount macro. This is a very, very simple macro, but I was running into more action bar situations. I didn't want to have all 8 action bars active and all over the place and, a bunch of holes everywhere and a cluttered UI. So I wanted a simple ability that I could press that would use my mounts in the correct situations. So what this goes ahead and does is that if I'm in an area that allows me to fly, then it'll cast my Bronze Drake. And if I'm in an area that doesn't allow me to fly, like Stormwind or inside of Dalaran, then it'll automatically cast my Black War Tiger. Now you can set this up any way you want to, and an easy way to go ahead and put your mounts into the macro is that you'll have to type the /cast, but then you can go ahead and pull up your mount collections, and then you just shift click on your mount and it'll go ahead and put it into the macro. Now, if you're a raid leader or you just frequently find yourself trying to mark certain targets with the skull or the diamond markings, and you frequently find yourself forgetting which keybind you have that set to, or you're getting tired of having to right click on someone and then hit the certain shape you want to mark them with, I have some macros that'll handle all of those shapes for you. So on the screen, we can see this is the macro that handles the X, so the cross, the red cross. It's a very simple macro, and you're going to have to designate your own tooltip for this. So we're not going to have any show tooltip. You'll have to set your own icon. That's what it means. But the macro is pretty simple. It just says /script, set raid target, and then in that little box, it's quote target, comma, and then 7 is the designator for what shape it's going to be. So if you want diamond, for example, you would change it to a 3. If you want square, you would change it to a 6. There's a total of 8, so don't go past 8. But, you can go ahead and set all of those and then set them up on an action bar. And then all you have to do is go ahead and click on the target you want to set a marking on. And then you can click that button and it'll mark that target. Simple as that. That's all the macros I have for you today. If you think of any other macros that you think are useful, I would appreciate it if you go ahead and put that in the comments below. Also, if you want to make your own macros, I've pretty much given you the groundwork that you require in order to make almost any of the macros you're going to need to make for any of your other spells. Just keep in mind that you're going to want to go ahead and try and combine as much into the same macro as you can. And that'll make you even more efficient. You know, the casting auto shot, casting kill command, all those spells that you don't need to click that button yourself. You could just tie that into other spells so that you don't even have to pay attention to that anymore. And you can just focus on the things that matter. The reason why you can go ahead and tie kill command into your other spells is because it's off the global cooldown. So you can pop that at any time whenever it's off cooldown. So any other abilities that your class or your specialization has, like that, you can go ahead and tie that into macros and save your life some pain of having more keybinds on your action bars and it taking you even more time to do your rotation. That's it for today, folks. Thank you for watching until the end. I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments, and if you're interested in supporting the channel, please like, subscribe, and don't forget to hit that notification button. If you want to catch me live on Twitch, the link is down in the video's description below. Other than that, I hope you all have a great day. Peace.